So this was never meant to be a video. I was never planning on it. It was just going to be a sewing bee that I was working on in private on my own time. But then of course, as soon as I started cutting some of the stuff apart, I thought, well, I'm not sure, maybe you would actually find this interesting and a little bit inspiring for your own sewing as well. And well, here we are. I'm recording this video. You see a big pile of fabric scraps right in front of me, so you know the drill. Today, as always, in the Made from Scraps videos, we are going to turn these into one really fun, unique, and beautiful garment. Let me start by showing you the supplies that we're going to be working with today. Super colorful, lots of bright, juicy colors over here. And all of these are cotton spandex jersey scraps, so they stretch in both directions, which is really nice. And yes, I did buy them. I know you're going to think that I'm crazy, but it wasn't on a whim. It was a very well thought through decision, and I'll explain why, I'll explain how and where just a little bit later, because there is another part of materials for this project. And I started cutting these up, as I mentioned in the very beginning, and these are two t-shirts that are new, but they were damaged. I also bought them. Oh, a lot of things to explain in this video. And the damage that they had is that they only had one sleeve, and also they were labeled size medium, but they were definitely way too big for me. And I usually wear like size small or medium, but these were like way too big. So I thought, let's just repurpose them, and I cut these apart to create a color block design. This is going to be a casual top, fun but casual, like a t-shirt, something to wear on an active day, let's say at the park. And the design that I have in mind is the one that I've loved for years now. I first drafted it way before I started the channel, and then every now and then I revisit it because I truly love how it looks and the possibilities for using up your fabric scraps. Now the pattern and design itself is really straightforward. It simply divides the front pattern piece into 3 pieces, and from here you can use a pattern that has a dart. You can also use a pattern that has no dart. If you're working with a darted pattern, I'll show you how to integrate the darts into these curved lines. I did a full video tutorial on this topic a couple years ago, since a lot of you have been asking me how to go about creating a design like this. And from here, you can also perhaps color block the sleeves or leave it sleeveless. It's definitely up to you. Now, I shared with you that I did cut up 2 of these t-shirts, and one in navy, one in this sort of peach color, but I really prefer doing this particular design with 3 colors. And sometimes it's really fun to mix in a little print as well, so don't get discouraged, don't get stuck on solids. This could work in a variety of different situations. But when I was going through these fabric scraps, I thought, why don't I add a really nice pop of color with this bright pink? The only thing that I have to do right now is I have to find big enough fabric scrap to accommodate either the piece on the left or on the right. Now, while I get that done, let me explain why in the world I decided to buy fabric scraps. And as I mentioned, it wasn't a decision that was made on a whim. I did think it through. I thought about different options, and the most obvious reason would be that I truly do enjoy working with fabric scraps. I do enjoy making the most out of the resources that otherwise would have been discarded. Whether I bought those fabric scraps or they were my fabric scraps, the ones that I produced. And I do enjoy that they flex my brain, they really stretch my imagination. It is a challenge, but I do enjoy a challenge. And working with fabric scraps is definitely all that and more. And on the practical side, another reason for getting those fabric scraps is that I do sew for my daughter, and she's kindergarten age, so the sewing mix aren't big, but you know, they're not like super tiny, but they're not big. And with a variety of techniques that I use for her clothing, a lot of times I just need the tiniest bit of fabric in a variety of different colors. You know, sometimes it's fun to insert a colorful cuff or the neckline, or I do a lot of applique and different techniques, and I only need just the tiniest bit. But when I shop for fabric online, in most cases, I can only buy starting at 1 yard. And 1 yard, especially in a color that you wouldn't otherwise use for a full garment, is just way too much. So I thought, well, this could potentially be a solution to that. Plus, I get to play with fabric scraps, and I get to play with them a little bit more, because obviously, in order for me to make a fabric scrap project, I first need to produce the fabric scraps, right? So that means they have to come from other sewing projects. So basically that's the reason why I decided to get the fabric scraps, and so far it has worked out really well. She likes to sew with them, I like to sew with them, plenty of colors that I wouldn't otherwise buy, but they're great for little techniques like I mentioned before. This particular one is all organic cotton spandex, and that's one of the reasons why I went with these fabric scrap boxes, because there are a variety out there on the market. And I bought them from thunderpants.com, not sponsored. If it was, I would have let you know. But from what I understand, they're a US-based company that makes undergarments. So they make undergarments, small batches, and then the offcuts from the production, they sell as fabric scrap boxes. And I love the colors. I love that I know the fabric content. They're all the same, all of the same weight, perfect for sewing for my daughter and then some for myself. So that's how I landed on this decision. I made a mess over here. I was desperately trying to find at least one fabric scrap that would be big enough to fit this pattern piece right here on the right side, since it's the smallest one. And a couple of them were quite close, but not enough, because as you know, when I draft my patterns, I also draft them without seam allowances on the paper, because I add them in as I cut my fabric. So I also have to factor that in. And just my luck, huh? None of them were big enough, but there is a way out of this. I know for sure. I want to stick still with the color block idea. We'll just need to pivot a little bit, adjust a little bit, and with that, I think I'm gonna change the color combination, because initially I was really set on these two plus the bright pink, but when I was going through all of the fabric scraps, I also saw this light blue, and when I put it together with the navy and the bright pink, I think this color combination just goes together a little bit smoother than with the peach one. So I think I might change this up. Since the fabric scraps that I'm using are all cotton knit, I'm working with a t-shirt as a base for my design. And since none of the fabric scraps are big enough for what I wanted to do as in the original idea, I need to divide it into more pieces. I'm thinking that maybe stripes would be a great solution, and also a really fun way to mix up different colors. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm sketching out these curved lines, and as I'm doing that, I'm also being mindful of where they're going to land, because I want to avoid intersection of multiple seams in order to not to create too much bulk. For any curved and asymmetrical designs, I mark two things. Number one, the position of how to place the pattern piece. That's why I write up, and also the notches. So that way, once the pattern pieces are cut, I know exactly how to align them. And also, one of the questions that I get asked quite often is, do I follow the grain line when I work with my fabric scrap project? And the answer is yes, unless there is a circumstance where the grain line doesn't matter at all. So these little horizontal lines, that's the direction of the stretch, and that's also the opposite direction of the grain line, and how I need to place these pattern pieces. The next step is to cut the pattern pieces out, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, find scrap fabric pieces that would be big enough to accommodate them. And here, surprise, surprise, all right, you won't believe my luck. So I have these two pattern pieces that I need to cut in light blue. And out of this entire pile of fabric scraps, this entire pile, I can't cut a single pattern piece. They're all either a little bit too narrow and a little bit too short, and I can't even cut it on the opposite grain. The only option is to skew the grain entirely, and I don't want to do that. Maybe this should have never been a video. Maybe it's just not meant to be. All right, let's take a moment, let's think. I think I have a couple of options. Option number one, to redraft the design according to the fabric scraps that I have. So to actually have the fabric scraps in mind and to change the lines completely, so that way I can cut the pattern pieces. Option number two is to go with the original combination of peach, bright pink, and navy. Option number three, however, I went back to the pile of fabric scraps, and I do have light green fabric scraps over there that are actually a little bit bigger than the light blue, and these two go really nice together, and I do think that dark blue kind of complements them. So option number three would be to ditch the previous color combination to go with a third one. All right, I'm going to take a look at what I have over here. You know, it's never a dull moment. Well, you know what they say, third time's a charm, right? And so it was. Finally, after all of that, I was able to cut all of the pattern pieces. And it almost feels unreal after experiencing a setback after a setback, but here it is. All right, I think it's time for the assembly, but I do have to do one thing before I sew all of this together, and I have to work a little bit on this middle piece in the peach color. And the reason for it is because the knit that I'm using here is a little bit lighter than all of the other knits in this project. And usually when I work on fabric scrap projects, if the difference in fabrics is really small, talking about weight of fabric, then you can get away with it without a problem. Then the garment washes well, it wears well, and you don't even feel it or notice it. But when the color is light of the fabric that is also lighter in weight, you can not only see it visually, but also when you're going to be pressing your seam allowances open or to the side of the light fabric, you usually will be able to see them on the right side of the garment. And I want to avoid that. And for cases like that, I usually keep on hand a light jersey knit, light, like a tissue weight, in this sort of like a vanilla or light beige color. I find that this color is a little bit more neutral than just white. White sometimes, when layered behind a certain color, sort of exaggerates that color. But I find that this one is pretty neutral. You put it underneath, you add a little bit of layer, you add a little bit of weight, and then you can continue with your project. Let me start with the top pieces over here. We're going to place them right sides together, aligning at the notches that we made previously. Here I've pinned all three fabrics together since the peach and the beige now are acting as one. And now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew it with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance using a lightning stitch. Now, lightning stitch is great for situations like these because it keeps the seam stretchy, but you can also press the seam open, which is exactly what I want to do in this case. Once all of the panels are attached, the next step, as I mentioned, is to top stitch it. And here I see 3 options, and I'm sure you can find more, but 3 that come to mind at first are: number 1, of course, you can use twin needle on your sewing machine. Number 2, you can use just a straight stitch on each side of the seam, but then you will need to use a special thread like Mataflex, Elaflex, Seraflex, or any other thread that's specifically designed for using straight straight stitch, I'll knit because the thread itself stretches. It's not shearing elastic, it's a different type of thread. I've done videos on it, and of course you can Google it as well. But if you've never heard about it, it's a nifty little tool when it comes to sewing knits. And number 3, of course, is to use a cover stitch machine, and I have a cover stitch machine, so I'm gonna go with that one. Once the panels were sewn together and then top stitched, I'm going to move on to cutting out the bottom and the back pattern pieces for my top. Now here I did double check beforehand to make sure that I will have enough to cut the necessary pieces, so I knew there wouldn't be any surprises. And I managed to cut them in a way that preserved the bottom hem, which means a little bit less work for me. When we're working with asymmetrical designs, usually there is a specific order in which to assemble the pattern pieces. Here we're starting on the right side, connecting the low panel that we worked on with the bodice. After that is done, I'm gonna give it a really good press and then attach the other side. On the back pattern piece of the top, I also decided to add a little color blocking element to sort of tie everything together. Here you can see that little shoulder piece. It mimics the shoulder piece on the front of the pattern. Then of course I repeated all of the same techniques that I used for the front pattern pieces. After that, the last thing to figure out is the sleeves. And here I was debating whether to use 3 colors or just 2, and I was going back and forth, but I did settle on using just the mint and the dark blue. Once the sleeves were in, the last and final steps, of course, to finish the neckline. And here I had a scrap of dark blue ribbing, which I thought was perfect for this particular make. And with that, well, let's take a look at the final result. Really glad that this came together as it is, because initially I was really unsure of this color combination, not of the combination itself, but how it would look on me, because usually these sort of light pastel muted colors really wash me out. So I naturally gravitate to colors that have some saturation to them, nice juicy color as I say, right? So when I put these two together, I thought, oh man, I'm not sure how this is actually going to look on me, but with this dark blue, I think it's a nice balance, and I think it does look pretty nice, doesn't it? A little sporty, which is totally fine, that's what I was going for, but overall, I think it's a winner. If you want to see how I made this shirt, also from fabric scraps, then click on the video that you see on the screen. And I want to thank you so much for tagging along in this adventure. I hope that you got inspired. I hope that you got some creative ideas. And until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. I'll see you very soon in the next video. Bye!